The rain had just begun to fall when Aaron left. No slammed door, no whispered goodbye. Just the soft murmur of drizzle against glass, and the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the air like a memory refusing to fade. Elise stood by the bookshelf, staring at the empty space where his coat used to hang. The silence felt heavier than grief. It was the echo of everything left unsaid. Love, once fluent, had turned into a language neither could speak. And yet, somewhere between the pages of The Secret Garden, a secret waited, a letter buried deep, carrying the words he couldn't bring himself to say aloud. Days blurred like fading Polaroids. Elise tried to fill the silence with routine. A new rhythm, a different perfume. Laughter borrowed from friends, yet every sound felt like a ghost. The echo of footsteps in the hall still carried his name. She told herself closure had no need for ceremony, that silence was cleaner than confrontation. But when her hand brushed the spines of their old books, something in her always paused, as if the past was breathing between the pages. Across the river, Aaron lived in quiet exile. He brewed coffee for one, read newspapers he didn't absorb, and sat by the window as if waiting for an apology that would never come. The letter haunted him. Not its contents, but the act of writing it. Words could heal or destroy. His had done both. On a gray afternoon, Elise decided to reorganize her shelves, a symbolic act of renewal. She pulled each book from the rows like a relic, dusting, sorting, stacking. When The Secret Garden slipped from her hands, it landed open on the floor, and something white slipped loose. A breath from another life. The letter slid free, landing beside her hand. Her breath caught. She knew that handwriting. Every loop, every hesitation. For a long, trembling moment, she didn't move. Outside, the rain eased, as though the world itself held still, waiting for her to unfold what silence had kept sacred. Elise sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hands like something alive. The envelope was worn, edges softened by months of time. She traced her fingers over his name, Aaron Miller, as if the texture of the ink could tell her why he left. Her pulse drummed in her ears, echoing the rain against the glass. Slowly, she unsealed the flap, the paper whispering as it opened. The air thickened. His words reached across time and distance, speaking from the quiet that once separated them. The letter began without apology. Aaron's words were stripped bare, sentences written in the language of exhaustion and clarity. I left because words had failed us. I left because staying meant silence would consume us both. Elise's breath caught at every line. He wrote of love, of fear, of being unable to speak without breaking. Each paragraph unfolded like a confession to a ghost. Across the river, Aaron sat by his window, unaware that the moment had come. He stared into the fog, the same morning ritual, unaware of how the past was unfolding in another room. The city hummed below him. The same city they once explored, hand in hand, unaware it would someday separate them. Elise read on. If someday you find this, he had written, know that leaving wasn't about giving up. It was about not knowing how to stay. I wanted you to remember me in the light, before the silence. The words hit her like a slow tide. She pressed the letter to her chest, closing her eyes as though hearing his voice for the first time in months. Aaron's final line read simply, if love is ever to return, let it come as silence, no longer feared. Elise set the letter down beside her. Her tears didn't fall. They just waited at the edge, unspent. For the first time since he left, she whispered his name softly enough that it didn't echo. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world, briefly, was still. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. The letter lay on her nightstand, illuminated by the soft hum of the city beyond her window. She replayed every word, every line she had once longed to hear in person. Her mind wandered to that last evening. The quiet fight, the withheld embrace, the final silence. She realized the letter wasn't just a confession. It was a mirror, showing what she too had failed to say. The ache was no longer grief. It was recognition. Across the river, Aaron scrolled through unfinished emails, drafts he'd written to Elise and never sent. Each began differently, but everyone ended the same way. "I still don't know how to talk to you." He had written and erased her name more times than he could count. Now, with the weight of distance pressing on him, he realized silence had become its own kind of prison. The next morning, Elise went for a walk. She passed the cafe they once frequented, the flower shop where he used to buy tulips each spring. The city looked unchanged, but her perception of it wasn't. Every corner carried an echo. She didn't want him back. She wanted understanding and the courage to forgive. At the same hour, Aaron stepped outside for the first time in weeks. He wandered aimlessly through alleys drenched in morning mist, feeling like a man walking through the ruins of his own choices. For the first time, he didn't try to justify the past. He just let it weigh on him, quietly, honestly. That evening, Elise returned home and read the letter once more, this time aloud. The sound of her voice gave the words new life, fragile but real. By the final line, she was no longer crying. The letter no longer belonged to her grief, but to her healing. She folded it carefully, placed it back between the pages of The Secret Garden, and closed the book. Some stories don't end. They simply change hands. Lisbon moved at its usual rhythm, trams humming over cobblestones, church bells echoing in the distance. But for Aaron and Elise, time had slowed. Each lived within their own silence, unaware of how close they'd drifted again. The city that once bound them now acted as messenger, weaving invisible paths toward rediscovery. Both walked its streets on opposite sides of the same day, haunted by the same refrain. What if it wasn't too late? Elise wandered into the small bookstore they once visited on Sundays. She hadn't planned to go there. Her feet had carried her out of memory's instinct. The familiar scent of paper and old wood wrapped around her like an embrace. She ran her fingertips along the shelves, half expecting to find him standing at the end of the aisle. Across the city, Aaron sat in a cafe by the river, staring at a notebook filled with words he couldn't bring himself to send. He wrote and erased, wrote and tore, every page a failed attempt at redemption. But for the first time, his words no longer sounded like apologies. They sounded like honesty. Later that day, Elise stepped outside and felt a sudden pull to walk by the river, a place she had avoided for months. The same breeze that once tangled their laughter returned, carrying fragments of songs from a nearby street musician. She didn't know that only a few streets away, Aaron had begun walking home from the same shore. Fate, like the tide, was beginning to turn. As the street lights flickered on, Aaron paused beneath an awning when rain began again. The same kind of rain that had marked his leaving. Across the street, through the wavering curtain of water, a familiar silhouette appeared. Elise had stopped too, seeking shelter under the canopy of a small cafe. Their eyes met for the first time since that night. No words, no gestures, just the raw electric recognition of two people who once shared everything and lost it. Neither of them moved at first. The rain softened into a mist, blurring the city around them until only the two of them remained in focus. Aaron felt the pulse in his throat quicken, the familiar ache of wanting to speak, but not knowing how. Elise's breath fogged in the cold air, her eyes locked on his, as if searching for the same courage. They were two souls suspended between the memory of goodbye and the possibility of something unfinished. Aaron stepped forward first. His voice broke the silence like glass, quiet but certain. "You found it," he said. Elise nodded, the corners of her lips trembling. "I did." A pause hung between them, heavy and soft. "I didn't know what to do with it," she admitted. Aaron smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes with remembering both pain and peace. "Neither did I," he whispered. They stepped under the awning together. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of rain became their language, the rhythm of shared silence, now no longer painful. Aaron finally said, "I didn't write it to make you come back. I wrote it because I couldn't keep not saying it." Elise looked at him, her expression softening. "I read it because I needed to remember why we ever began." And in that moment, understanding became the truest kind of reconciliation. The night stretched long, filled with stories untold. They spoke of everything except the months in between. How they had learned to live separately, how silence had taught them to listen differently. The city seemed to hum approval. When the cafe began to close, Aaron hesitated, then reached across the table. Elise took his hand without flinching. No promises, no new beginnings, just the truth of being seen again. Outside, the rain had stopped. They stood together at the edge of the street, the city shimmering in the aftermath. "I don't know what this means," Elise said. "Neither do I," Aaron replied. "But maybe not knowing is okay." Their smiles held more truth than any vow. As they walked away, not apart, but side by side, the letter remained behind them, safe in its book. No longer a secret, but a testament to everything silence could not erase. The morning after their reunion, the world felt different. Lighter, quieter, yet filled with the same delicate tension of something unfinished. Aaron woke early, expecting emptiness, but found instead a kind of calm that wasn't absence. Elise lingered over coffee in her kitchen. The taste rich and strange, like rediscovering something familiar yet changed. They were no longer lovers, not yet strangers, just two people learning how to exist again in the same world without breaking. Later that day, Aaron found himself walking to the bookshop again. He hadn't meant to, his body just knew the way. He ran his fingers along the shelves, stopping at the section where the secret garden might have once been. The letter had returned them to each other, but now it belonged to time. He whispered under his breath, "Thank you for finding it." Elise spent her afternoon by the river. She watched children toss breadcrumbs to pigeons, an old man sketching under an umbrella, and a couple arguing softly about directions. She smiled. Life had kept moving, even when she had not. The letter had not mended what was lost. It had simply shown her where it had begun. Healing wasn't about returning. It was about remembering without hurting. That evening, Aaron wrote again, not to Elise, but to himself. The words came easily now, unforced, clear. Love doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes memory, then forgiveness, then understanding. He folded the paper and slipped it into his journal. For the first time, he didn't need her to read it. The act of writing was enough. As night settled, Elise returned home. She pulled the secret garden from her shelf and smiled at its weight in her hands. The letter still rested within, now creased, softened, and safe. She didn't read it again. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed the book back where it belonged and whispered, "We made it through." Then she turned off the light. The silence that filled the room was no longer heavy. It was whole. Months passed. The air of Lisbon turned lighter, washed in spring sun and the scent of sea salt. The wounds of the past no longer ached. They pulsed quietly, like distant waves. Elise often walked through the streets without thinking of him, and when she did, it was no longer with pain, but with gratitude. Somewhere across the city, Aaron lived his days in rhythm with the same sky. Their lives had drifted apart, yet the silence between them had turned gentle. A silence that understood. Aaron visited the old cafe one afternoon, not expecting her, not even hoping. He simply wanted to remember. The waiter still recognized him, nodding silently, as if time hadn't passed. He sat by the window where they once shared secrets and silence alike. The seat across from him was empty, but it didn't ache anymore. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with reunion. It arrives when the absence stops hurting. That same evening, Elise attended an art exhibit at a small gallery by the waterfront. She didn't expect to see a photograph of a letter, its edges familiar, its ink blurred by age. The caption beneath read, "Words we leave behind." She smiled, recognizing the handwriting instantly. He had turned their goodbye into art, and somehow into a beginning neither of them could claim, but both could honor. Later that night, Elise stepped out onto the gallery terrace overlooking the river. The city glittered beneath her. The same one where heartbreak had once been a weight, now turned to quiet music. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and felt the pulse of the world returning in steady rhythm. Love had not died. It had changed its form, from possession to peace, from absence to art. Far across the river, Aaron looked out his window at the same lights. He thought of her, not as loss, not as longing, but as proof that love had once spoken through silence and survived it. He whispered into the stillness, "Thank you." And for the first time, the silence replied not with emptiness, but with peace. The letter remained framed on the gallery wall, glowing softly under white light, not a relic of heartbreak, but a testament that even what ends can echo forever.